Welcome back, fellow science fiction aficionados and denizens of the deep underground. Today, we are descending 144 levels into the concrete abyss to dissect one of the most fascinating television adaptations in recent memory. When fans of a beloved literary universe hear that their favorite characters are being adapted for the screen, a unique blend of exhilaration and terror inevitably sets in. I am talking, of course, about Apple TV Plus's masterful, yet heavily altered, translation of Hugh Howey's beloved Silo book series. Originally beginning as a self published short story titled Wool in 2011, Howey's dystopian universe eventually expanded into a sprawling, critically acclaimed trilogy comprised of Wool, Shift, and Dust. When showrunner Graham Yost took the helm to bring this claustrophobic masterpiece to the screen, he was faced with a monumental task. How do you translate a story told largely through internal monologue, slow burn world building, and creeping psychological dread into a propulsive, visually engaging weekly television thriller? The answer, as it turns out, is by changing a lot more than you might initially think. While Hugh Howey has been incredibly supportive of these alterations, correctly noting that television demands entirely different narrative engines than literature, the differences between the source material and the Apple TV Plus series are undeniably profound. From completely restructuring the villains and inventing brand new neurological diseases to entirely rewriting the mythology of the apocalypse and giving our main character a highly controversial case of amnesia in season 3, the show is now charting its own unique, unpredictable course. Today, we are going to break down the top 5 biggest differences between the Silo books and the television show, exploring exactly why these changes were made, how they fundamentally impact the overarching story, and what they might mean for the highly anticipated fourth and final season. Grab your heat tape, mind the stairs, and let us dive in. Chapter 1: World Building, Geography, and the Scale of the Silo. When delving into the literary architecture of Hugh Howey's original novels, the sheer geographical immensity of the silo cannot be overstated. The literary version of the silo is a staggering feat of structural engineering that dictates the entire culture, economy, and physical reality of its inhabitants. In the novels, the silo is so unimaginably deep that traveling by foot from the upper levels to the down deep takes roughly 2 to 3 grueling days. In the text, the porters are a vital respected class, acting as the only true physical link between the disparate communities. This agonizing physical journey means that travelers must literally set up camp and sleep on the spiral staircase overnight. This creates a deeply entrenched, almost insurmountable class divide. The people of the up top, the mids, and the down deep are entirely segregated by the sheer exhaustion of travel. However, in the television show, characters seem to bounce between the mechanical levels and the mayor's offices in a matter of a few short hours. The physical distance is vastly compressed. This was a necessary concession for the medium of television, preventing the narrative from stalling while characters simply walk for 2 entire episodes. But it does make the on screen silo feel far more physically connected and less mythically sprawling. To compensate for this loss of physical tension, the writers brilliantly invented a brand new threat: the syndrome. This neurological condition, characterized by uncontrollable hand tremors and ultimate motor failure, does not exist anywhere in the text of the novels. By introducing it on screen, the creators provided a visual ticking clock physical threat. It forces characters to hide their symptoms out of pure paranoia, knowing that a diagnosis will strip them of their jobs and status, adding an immediate, visceral layer of stress to the environment. Furthermore, the television adaptation drastically alters what the citizens actually know about the world before the apocalypse. In the books, the inhabitants possess a rudimentary, albeit fragmented, understanding of concepts like religion, priests, the sun, the stars, and even certain animals like elephants. They glean this from smuggled, forbidden children's books and whispered astrology. The Apple TV Plus adaptation strips almost all of this away. The on screen citizens are entirely ignorant to the concept of a camera, let alone the cosmos. By eradicating their knowledge of the past, the show makes their intellectual isolation absolute, rendering the erasure of history far more terrifying. This control is further reflected in their wardrobes. Hugh Howey's novels dictate that almost every citizen wears strictly color coded coveralls, denoting their specific profession, visually reinforcing that they are nothing more than equal, replaceable cogs in a giant subterranean machine. The show, however, allows characters distinct personal fashion and choices, such as Robert Sims sporting a sleek leather jacket, which slightly softens the rigid, uniform caste system present in the books, but allows for greater visual character expression on screen. Chapter Character transformations and deepening the emotional anchors. Television relies heavily on immediate, externalized emotional stakes, and to achieve this, the writers significantly retooled several key figures in Juliet Nichols' life. The most striking of these changes is the transformation of Martha Walker. In the original text, Walker is an older man who serves as a gruff mentor figure in Mechanical. For the screen, the character was entirely gender swapped to a woman, brilliantly brought to life by the legendary Harriet Walter. Showrunner Graham Yost made this deliberate alteration to provide Juliet with a much needed maternal figure. Because Juliet carries the deep, unresolved trauma of losing her own mother at a very young age, transforming Walker into an agoraphobic mother surrogate gives Juliet a profound emotional anchor. By completely gender swapping the character of Martha Walker, Graham Yost gave Juliet the maternal scaffolding she desperately needed to endure the relentless psychological punishment of the silo. Their dynamic provides a soft beating heart amidst the cold steel of the lower levels. Equally important is the massive expansion of George Wilkins. If you were to read the first book, Wool, you might be genuinely surprised to find that George is essentially a minor footnote. He was simply an enthusiastic, curious mechanic who wanted to improve life in the silo by digging laterally, completely unaware that his innovative ideas were strictly taboo. He is already dead before the main story even begins, and his death warrants little more than a passing mention to establish Juliet's general distrust of authority. The television show takes this tiny narrative thread and spins it into an entire season long tapestry. George is transformed into an active, rebellious investigator, deliberately hunting down the silo's darkest, most dangerous secrets. Furthermore, the show builds a sweeping, tragic romance between him and Juliet through extensive, emotionally charged flashbacks. This shifts Juliet's central motivation from a generalized, slow burn pushback against a corrupt system to a highly personal, deeply fueled quest to solve the murder of her lover. Then we have the shifting identity of Paul Billings. In the literary timeline, this character is actually named Peter. The television writers likely changed his name to Paul to avoid any confusing overlap with Juliet's father, who is also named Peter. But the changes go far beyond a simple renaming. The show grafts the previously mentioned television original illness, the syndrome, onto Paul's character. This brilliant addition layers his rigid, rule following demeanor with a deep existential vulnerability. It creates a fascinating dynamic of mutually assured destruction and secrecy between him and Juliet during her time as sheriff. Finally, we must mention Lucas. In the books, Bernard recruits Lucas to become his shadow, essentially his apprentice in the information technology department, slowly pulling him into the terrifying fold of the silo's deepest, darkest administrative secrets. The show takes a much harsher, more punitive route, punishing Lucas with a grueling 10-year sentence in the iron mines simply for assisting Juliet, entirely rewriting his trajectory and drastically altering his role in the overarching narrative. Chapter 3 The Villains, the Rise of Judicial and Tangible Threats. When analyzing the structural mechanics of the narrative, the alteration to the silo's hierarchy of power is arguably the most significant change from page to screen. If you delve into the original text, the true, insidious power controlling the lives of the citizens lies completely and solely with the Information Technology Department and its head, Bernard. In the literary universe, the Department of Judicial essentially does not exist as a major, terrifying entity. The oppression in the books is a slow burn, creeping paranoia of quiet, invisible administrative control. Bernard is the undisputed puppet master, using data, server access, and information compartmentalization as his primary weapons of subjugation. However, television is a visual medium that demands visible, active, and immediate conflict. You cannot simply film people typing ominously on keyboards for 10 episodes and expect to retain an audience's attention. Thus, the showrunners birthed the Department of Judicial, shaping it into a prominent, heavily feared, and deeply oppressive secret police force, complete with its own shadowy figures, such as Judge Meadows. Judicial acts as the terrifying, tangible muscle of the silo. This leads us directly to the character of Robert Sims. If you read the books, Sims is barely a footnote in the grand scheme of the plot. He operates quietly in the background, a minor lackey executing orders for his superiors in information technology. The Apple TV Plus adaptation elevates Sims to the level of a primary antagonist. Common brings a stoic, terrifying physicality to the role, ensuring that the audience feels the immediate threat of violence at all times. He becomes the terrifying, leather clad enforcer of judicial, a man willing to commit murder, poison his rivals, and ruin lives to maintain the delicate status quo of the underground society. By creating judicial and drastically amplifying the role of Robert Sims, the television series provides audiences with a tangible, intimidating antagonist to fear on a week to week basis. It transforms a philosophical battle over information control into a gripping physical political thriller. The show even uses Bernard's true role as a massive narrative twist. In the books, Bernard is revealed early on as the clear villain and de facto ruler, with absolutely no ambiguity about his moral standing or his ultimate goals. The show, conversely, writes Bernard, with layers of brilliant misdirection throughout most of season 1. He is positioned as a red herring, sometimes even appearing as a potential bureaucratic ally to Juliet, before the chilling truth of his ultimate authority is finally unmasked. This bait and switch perfectly weaponizes the expectations of longtime book readers while keeping entirely new viewers on the absolute edge of their seats, proving that the writers understand how to manipulate television tropes to their maximum advantage. Chapter 4. Pacing, momentum, and the evolution of the core mystery. Adapting a novel into a television series is not just about changing the events of the plot. It is fundamentally about altering the speed at which information is delivered to the audience. Hugh Howey's novels are a quintessential slow burn. The text meticulously and methodically peels back the countless mundane layers of how the silo operates on a daily basis. It grounds you in the gritty reality of the mechanics, the hydroponics, and the strict societal rules long before it ever begins to reveal the broader, world shattering mysteries of the toxic outside world. The books spend extensive time explaining the internal resource management and the literal mechanics of human survival in a closed system. The television adaptation, however, recognizes that modern streaming audiences demand immediate narrative hooks and propulsive momentum. Therefore, the overarching conspiracy regarding the outside world is heavily front loaded. The show deliberately hints that the massive screens displaying the toxic wasteland might actually be lying to the citizens within the very first few episodes. By dangling this massive mystery box so early in the runtime, the television adaptation hooks viewers with a relentless cinematic drive. It trades the deeply immersive, slowly suffocating claustrophobia of the novel's early chapters for the immediate, high stakes drama of a dystopian conspiracy thriller. Nowhere is this shift in pacing more evident than in the infamous generator repair sequence. In the source material, shutting down the main power generator to repair it is presented as a relatively routine, albeit important, mechanical job. It is a hard day of manual labor for the mechanics down deep, but it is not framed as a world ending apocalyptic crisis. Reading about a generator repair allows the reader to pause, to breathe, and to imagine the logistics at their own pace. Television affords no such luxury. It demands your pulse races in tandem with the characters on screen. The television show takes this routine maintenance and injects it with pure adrenaline, transforming it into a high stakes, heart pounding, cliffhanger driven set piece. The tension is dialed up to a maximum degree, with water levels rapidly rising, metal bending under pressure, and Juliet putting her life on the line in a terrifying race against the clock to restore power before the entire silo suffocates in the dark. This single sequence perfectly encapsulates the adaptation's core philosophy. It willingly sacrifices some of the grounded, logistical world building depth found in the books in exchange for sheer, breathtaking television momentum, ensuring that the visual medium is utilized to its absolute maximum potential to keep audiences glued to their screens. Chapter 5. Season 3 and the divisive prequel era rewrite. As the Apple TV Plus series moved beyond the events of the first book, Wool, It faced a massive narrative hurdle regarding the sequels, Shift and Dust. The second book, Shift, is entirely a prequel. It meticulously details the origins of the apocalypse in the mid 21st century and the complex construction of the silos, largely sidelining the main protagonist, Juliet, for an entire novel. Recognizing that you simply cannot sideline your lead actress and the emotional core of your television show for a whole season, the creators made their most drastic and divisive changes yet. Instead of a pure prequel, Season 3 boldly interweaves a before time storyline spanning from the 1970s to the year 2049, directly alongside a present day timeline, focusing on Juliet's ongoing struggle. But the most controversial alteration is what happens to Juliet after she survives the season 2 airlock cliffhanger. In a plot device entirely invented for the screen, Juliet is subjected to an in universe memory wiping procedure known as a reset, giving her profound debilitating amnesia. This amnesia plotline does not exist anywhere in the pages of Hugh Howey's novels. It has proven to be the single most divisive change in the entire fandom, resulting in a stark critical divide, boasting a 100% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, but a heavily fractured 57% audience score. Furthermore, the foundational lore of the Before Times was heavily rewritten. The central prequel character from the books, a conflicted congressman named Donald Keene, was mysteriously renamed Daniel Keene for the show. The television series even poked fun at this by having a character mistakenly misremember his name as Donald on screen. Additionally, the show completely cuts the pre-existing romantic backstory between Daniel and Anna Thurman, a deeply emotional relationship that fundamentally drives many of his tragic choices in the source material. Finally, the show explicitly names a geopolitical conflict involving the United States and Iran, culminating in a dirty bomb scenario as the direct trigger for the apocalypse. By naming a specific geopolitical entity and detailing a dirty bomb conflict between the United States and Iran, the show forces the narrative out of the realm of abstract dystopian mythology and grounds it in our own uncomfortable contemporary political anxieties. This is a massive departure from the books, which purposefully kept the geopolitical causes of the world's end incredibly vague and mysterious. These profound shifts fundamentally rewrite the history of the silo, changing the very foundation of the tragedy that forced humanity underground in the first place. Conclusion. In the final analysis, the translation of Silo from a self-published literary phenomenon to a blockbuster streaming event is a masterclass in the art and necessity of adaptation. Showrunner Graham Yost and his team understood that you cannot simply copy and paste a novel onto a screen and expect it to resonate in the same way. By compressing the immense geographical scale of the silo, expanding minor characters like George Wilkins and Robert Sims into central emotional and antagonistic pillars, and accelerating the pacing of the core mystery, they crafted a propulsive, visually arresting television experience. While the sweeping changes made in Season 3, particularly the highly controversial amnesia reset and the explicit rewriting of the apocalypse's origins, have deeply divided the passionate fan base, they undeniably prove that the show is unafraid to forge its own distinct identity, separate from the text. Whether you fall into the 100% critic approval camp or the 57% audience division, there is no denying that the series has sparked vital conversations about the very nature of adaptation. As we look ahead to the fourth and final season, which has already finished filming, the ultimate question remains: how will the show actually end? In the final novel, Dust, Juliet boldly leads an effort to dig a tunnel connecting to Silo 17, ultimately leading the survivors out into a healed, livable world beyond an artificial barrier of toxic nanobots. However, with Daniel and Anna's backstory completely erased and the fundamental rules of memory and history completely rewritten by the show's new amnesia mechanics, the endgame is now entirely unpredictable. Will the television series follow Hugh Howey's ultimately optimistic conclusion, or has this new narrative path doomed the citizens of the silo to a much darker, inescapable fate? Only time will tell. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the depths of the silo. Be sure to leave your thoughts on these massive narrative changes in the comments below, and I will catch you in the next video essay. Keep your eyes on the screens and never stop questioning what you see.